Do we expect too much from our politicians? Given the velocity of the news these days, you'd be forgiven for having almost forgotten one of the most serious ethics scandals in recent Canadian history. You might recall that in 2019, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was found to have violated sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. But there is much more to the story. With the federal election on the horizon, I thought this would be a good time to review the Ethics Commission's report and bring the scandal back into the public memory. If we're going to vote for someone, should we expect them to be ethical? And what does this case say about the ethics of Justin Trudeau? We already know how the story ends, but believe me, the middle is a lot more interesting than the beginning or the ending. In hindsight, it's astonishing how quickly one of the most serious ethics scandals in Canadian history could disappear down the memory hole this quickly. It all starts with the filing of bribery and fraud charges in Canada against Quebec multinational SNC Lavalin in 2015. This arises from the company's bribing of officials in Libya to obtain contracts there. Now, note that this isn't alleged because in 2019, SNC Lavalin pleaded guilty and agreed to pay a $280 million fine. The real problem for SNC wasn't the criminal charge itself. It was the fact that a conviction carried with it a ban from being eligible for Canadian government contracts for a period of 10 years. And, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that SNC Lavalin usually has its nose planted firmly in the trough for Canadian government contracts. In order to avoid prosecution, SNC sought to cut a deal with prosecutors through something called a remediation agreement. The problem was that Canada didn't have a remediation agreement regime at the time. What SNC needed was a friend in Ottawa, a powerful friend who could get some legislation amended or passed which would bring remediation agreements into the criminal code. Fortunately for SNC, they had such a friend. In fact, they had a lot of friends in Ottawa. In 2016, Trudeau meets with SNC, and there is continued communications in 2017 and 2018. In addition, SNC meets with then Finance Minister Bill Morneau in Davos, Switzerland. The message from SNC is clear. They need the remediation agreement regime implemented, and they need it implemented now. Within a month, the remediation agreement regime is implemented in amendments to the criminal code. Interestingly, Wilson Raybould testifies at the ethics inquiry that the remediation agreement amendments were rushed, and therefore she chose not to participate in the selling of the amendments to cabinet or committee. The amendments were passed into law in June 2018 and came into force in September 2018. But this is only the opening chapter. What is about to become one of the largest ethics scandals in Canadian history is about to begin. To this point, there's been little friction for SNC because they've been dealing primarily with their political friends in high office. However, things are about to change. The boys in Ottawa are about to find out that Wilson Raybould does not play ball. Wilson Raybould is first contacted by a representative from the Ministry of Finance. That representative advises Wilson Raybould that something needs to be done and SNC needs to be given the remediation agreement that both the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister so desperately want. It's at this point that the institutional antibodies kick in. Wilson Raybould advises the representative that she will not interfere with the prosecutor's decision. At the inquiry, Wilson Raybould says that this is the first time in her 3 years as Attorney General that she had been contacted by another minister's office about a specific prosecution. To her credit, she resists the political pressure and refuses to intervene with the prosecution of SNC. Things go from bad to worse for SNC. In September 2018, the prosecution service lowers the boom. There will be no remediation agreement with SNC. One can imagine the hand-wringing now going on in the boardrooms of SNC Lavalin and in the Prime Minister's office. But neither of them is going to give up just yet. It's possible that the Attorney General thought that the Prime Minister who appointed her would have her back. If resisting the political pressure to interfere in the prosecution of SNC Lavalin was her first mistake, trusting Justin Trudeau was her second. On September 17, 2018, Trudeau was scheduled to meet with the Attorney General. SNC was on the agenda. According to pre-meeting notes, it had been made clear to Trudeau that he could not ask or direct Wilson Raybould to interfere with the SNC prosecutor's decision. Despite this, the meeting starts with Trudeau doing just that. Trudeau reminds the AG that there was an upcoming election in Quebec and that Trudeau was an MP in Quebec. According to Trudeau, all he wanted was for the AG to, quote, help find a solution to the SNC matter. Wilson Raybould was not interested in playing games. She asked Trudeau directly, is it your intention to politically interfere with my role as AG? Trudeau doesn't answer. He just repeats that they need to find a solution. It's November 2018 and SNC are running out of time. Two of the PM's senior advisors are dispatched to once again discuss the file with Wilson Raybould. They tell her about the potential consequences of SNC not getting what it wants. Trudeau later denies being briefed by his staff about this meeting. I'll leave it to the viewer to decide whether that is a credible denial under the circumstances. It's now December 2018 and something curious happens. Wilson Raybould requests a dinner meeting with Trudeau confidant Gerald Butts. According to Wilson Raybould, she was attempting to stop the pressure campaign from the PMO's office. She apparently thought that Butts would have the necessary influence. Interestingly, Butts denies Wilson Raybould's version of these events. Once again, Trudeau denies being briefed by Butts about this meeting. What's clear from the record at this point is that Trudeau is not happy with Wilson Raybould and her quaint notions of prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. On December 19, 2018, he has Michael Wernick, clerk of the Privy Council, send a blunt message to Wilson Raybould. The Prime Minister wants an accommodation for SNC, and he'll get it, one way or another. Once again, Trudeau denies that this was in fact the message he wanted to send, either in form or substance. And, once again, having regard to the circumstances, that denial seems implausible. Wernick also recants everything and denies that he made the call at Trudeau's behest. Had there not been a transcript, he no doubt would have denied the entire conversation. From Trudeau's perspective, he no doubt thought that he had given Wilson Raybould every opportunity to do what he expected of her. Trudeau had finally run out of patience. On January 14, 2019, Raybould is ousted. Longtime Liberal operative and Quebec MP David Lametti takes her place as Attorney General and Minister of Justice. The PMO wastes no time on briefing Lametti on the importance of cutting a deal with SNC. They also continue to have discussions with SNC's legal counsel. Trudeau has had to rush a new law into place, pressure his AG, and finally replace her, but he and SNC are finally going to get what they want, a sweetheart deal for SNC. But they run out of time. On February 7, 2019, the scandal becomes public, and there is a media frenzy. A 10,000-watt spotlight is now on SNC, Morneau, Trudeau, and Lametti. The jig is up for SNC. The next stop? A guilty plea. It may be over for SNC, but it's only just started for Justin Trudeau. A messy ethics inquiry and an embarrassing scandal now lay before him. But there will be no mea culpa, and before it's over, he'll do his best to get even with Wilson Raybould. On February 8, 2019, Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion advises Trudeau that there's going to be another ethics inquiry, this time into SNC Lavalin. I say another because Trudeau had previously been found to have violated a host of other ethics rules for accepting luxury vacations from the Aga Khan, a very wealthy religious leader. In keeping with his usual strategy of playing the innocent altar boy, Trudeau denies any wrongdoing and minimizes his role in the scandal. But he doesn't just stop there. In an unusual move, he instructs his legal counsel to attack Wilson Raybould. I say that Trudeau instructed his legal counsel because that is the way lawyers operate. They act on instructions. Whether this was intended to distract from Trudeau's corruption and lack of ethics, or if Trudeau was signaling to SNC, or if it was simply sour grapes, we'll never know. But the Ethics Commissioner spends a lot of time reviewing the submissions from Trudeau's lawyers in this regard, and they are fairly incredible. They start by saying that Trudeau had a challenging, intense relationship with Wilson Raybould, and that there was significant friction among her and her cabinet colleagues. The submissions claim that SNC was not the driving force behind the introduction of the remediation agreements in the criminal code. Then they get unusually personal. Trudeau's lawyers argued that Wilson Raybould's evidence at the inquiry was tainted by her anger at having been removed as Attorney General, and that it was always in her power to complain if Trudeau had crossed a line. Alternatively, they suggested, she could have resigned. This last bit is some of the most egregious victim blaming you'll probably ever see. In Trudeau's world, it's not his fault that he's unethical. It's your fault that you won't resign. But Trudeau doesn't stop there. He claims that Wilson Raybould failed to acquaint herself with all of the relevant facts in coming to her decision, and that her decision-making process was inadequate and infected by legal misunderstanding. Finally, Trudeau's legal team accuses Wilson Raybould of being, quote, politically motivated in her decision-making. One need only read the Commissioner's entire report to understand just how hypocritical that charge was. We know how this one ends, of course. Trudeau is found to have violated the Conflict of Interest Act, and his wrist is firmly slapped by Mario Dion. The political fallout is, however, serious. There are calls for his resignation, and his credibility takes a permanent hit. Do we ask too much when we expect our leaders to be ethical? Perhaps the real question is whether a lack of ethics points to a serious character deficiency that disqualifies one from asking for the public's trust. Justin Trudeau didn't just violate some technical ethics rule. He manipulated the machinery of government for a political purpose. He removed an attorney general in order to serve the interests of a corporate backer. He then ruthlessly attacked her during an ethics investigation. At what point does crossing a line turn into defacing the very surface upon which that line is drawn? Ethics may sound like a first-world luxury, but they're not. Ethics are a form of accountability, and once our politicians are of the view that they don't need to be ethical, there is no accountability. And from that point, there's not much keeping you from a descent into a place like Mexico or Russia, where corruption is rife and ethics are simply not observed. As a result, it's entirely appropriate that we expect our politicians to be ethical. If they can't be ethical, then they can't honor the public trust. And if they can't honor the public trust, they have no business in power.